People who were kicked out of their homes. What happened? I was 19 when my stepfather Calvin decided I wasn't his problem anymore. Mom had married him when I was 14, and for 5 years, we'd maintained this careful dance of mutual tolerance. He paid for my food and roof. I stayed invisible and grateful. The arrangement worked until I came home from my restaurant job to find my belongings in garbage bags on the front porch. "What's this?" I asked, finding Calvin in his recliner, beer in hand, watching sports highlights. "You're an adult now," he said without looking up. "Time to figure out your own life." Mom appeared from the kitchen, dish towel in her hands, eyes red from crying. "Calvin, please," she whispered. "He's still in school." "Not my kid, not my responsibility," he replied. "I've supported him long enough." The irony was bitter. Calvin had never supported me. Not really. I'd been working since 15, paying for my own clothes, gas, school supplies. The only thing he'd provided was a roof over my head, and apparently that generosity had an expiration date. I'd been planning to start community college in the fall, working doubles at the restaurant to save money. My bank account had exactly 847s, enough for maybe 2 weeks of survival if I was careful. "This is about the college thing, isn't it?" I asked. Calvin had been increasingly hostile since I'd announced my plans to study social work. "You think education is a waste of money?" "I think you're a waste of money," he replied without taking his eyes off the TV. 19 years old and still living off other people. Time to sink or swim. "Mom?" I looked at her, hoping she'd fight for me the way she used to fight for us when Dad was alive. She twisted the dish towel in her hands, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she managed, "Maybe it's time you became independent." The betrayal hit harder than Calvin's rejection. This was the woman who'd promised me after Dad died that we'd always have each other, who'd held me while I cried at his funeral and sworn that nothing would ever come between us. But something had come between us. Calvin had systematically isolated her from everyone who'd known her before. Her friends, her sister, even the neighbors who'd been close to our family when Dad was alive. He'd convinced her that starting fresh meant cutting ties with the past, including me. I loaded my bags into my beat-up Honda, a car I'd bought myself with restaurant money when Calvin refused to help with transportation. As I packed, I found notes I'd written to Mom over the years, thanking her for things she'd done. Mother's Day cards where I'd tried to express how grateful I was that we'd survived Dad's death together. Birthday letters where I'd promised to take care of her when I got older. All of them stuffed in a box that Calvin had obviously gone through, marked trash in his handwriting. I drove to the only place I could afford, a weekly motel on the edge of town. $49 a night for a room that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. The bedspread had stains I didn't want to identify, and the air conditioning unit sounded like it was dying a slow, painful death. The motel clerk, a woman named Dolores with kind eyes and tired face, noticed my age and the garbage bags. "Family trouble?" she asked gently. "Something like that." "Well, you pay on time and don't cause problems. We'll get along fine. There's a laundromat next door and a diner across the street that's not too expensive. You look like you could use a good meal." For 3 weeks, I kept up the routine. Work, motel, repeat. Shower in a bathroom that never felt clean, eat ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, fall asleep to the sound of truckers arguing in the parking lot. The isolation was the worst part. I'd gone from having a home, dysfunctional as it was, to having nothing. No family dinners, no one to talk to about my day, no sense of belonging anywhere. My manager at the restaurant, Tony, noticed I was wearing the same clothes and looking rougher each day. "You sleeping in your car?" he asked during a smoke break. "Something like that," I admitted. Tony studied my face with the expression of someone who'd seen this before. He was a man in his 60s who'd worked in restaurants his whole life, collecting stories of kids who'd fallen through the cracks. My nephew went through the same thing. Parents kicked him out senior year because he was gay. Lived in his car for 2 months before his grandmother took him in. "Want some advice?" I nodded, desperate for any wisdom that might help me survive this. "Stop trying to make it work with people who don't want you. Start building something with people who do." He stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me seriously. "You're a good worker. Reliable, honest, treat customers right. That counts for something. More than whatever bullshit your family's putting you through." That night, scrolling through social media in my dingy motel room, I saw Mom had posted photos from Calvin's birthday party. The table was set for 8 people. His kids from his first marriage, their spouses, grandchildren. Everyone looked happy and complete, like a real family. I wasn't in a single photo. It was like I'd never existed. The caption read, "Celebrating my wonderful husband with our beautiful family. So grateful for this man who brought us all together. Our beautiful family." As if I'd never been part of it. Then I noticed something in the background that made my blood freeze and my hands shake. On the kitchen counter, clearly visible behind the birthday cake, sat my father's watch, the only thing I'd wanted when he died. Mom had promised to save it for me when I turned 21, telling me it would be my inheritance from the man who'd raised me to believe family meant everything. Calvin was wearing it in every photo, my father's watch, on the wrist of the man who'd just thrown me away like garbage. The next morning, I drove to the house during Calvin's work hours. I needed answers, and I needed them from the one person who owed them to me. Mom answered the door looking surprised and guilty, like she'd been caught doing something shameful. "You can't just show up here," she said nervously, glancing over her shoulder. "Calvin doesn't want—" "I saw the photos," I cut her off. "Dad's watch. You gave it to him." Her face crumpled. "He needed something nice for work. You know how important appearances are in his business. I was going to ask you. That was Dad's. The only thing of his I wanted." You were living in a motel, she said defensively. What if you lost it? Calvin takes good care of his things. I stared at her, wondering when my mother had become this stranger who valued a stepfather's image over her own son's heritage. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house felt different, foreign. Pictures of Calvin's family covered the walls where our photos used to hang. Even the family portrait from when I was 12, the last one we'd taken before Dad got sick, had been replaced with a professional shot of Calvin's kids. Where are our pictures? I asked. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Calvin thought it was time to make this feel like his home. I walked through the house systematically, documenting everything with my phone. My father's books, gone. His tools that he'd promised to teach me to use, gone. The memorial garden Mom and I had planted together with his favorite flowers, torn up and replaced with Calvin's vegetable patch. You erased him, I said. You erased us. I had to move on, she said defensively, following me from room to room as I cataloged the destruction. Calvin's a good man. He deserves to feel like this is his space. What about me? What did I deserve? She couldn't look at me. You deserve to have a father figure who could provide for you. I had a father. You made me forget him. In my old bedroom, now Calvin's home office, I found boxes of my childhood things shoved in the closet. School projects, artwork, letters I'd written to Dad during his cancer treatment that Mom had saved. All of it hidden away like evidence of a crime. At the bottom of one box, I found something that made my stomach drop. Report cards and school records that Calvin had been keeping, but not for sentimental reasons. Attached to each report card was paperwork I'd never seen before. Social Security benefit applications, claims for dependent support, insurance forms listing Calvin as my legal guardian. That's when I noticed the manila envelope on the kitchen table, addressed to the Social Security Administration. I grabbed it before Mom could stop me. Inside were documents claiming Calvin as my stepfather for survivor benefits from Dad's death. Benefits that had been going to Mom since I was 14. Thousands of dollars that were supposed to help with my care and education. Calvin had been pocketing my father's survivor benefits for 5 years. This is fraud, I said, holding up the paperwork. Mom's face went white. You don't understand. Calvin manages our finances. He said it was easier if he stole money meant for me. The paperwork showed monthly deposits of $643. Money that should have been used for my school clothes, college savings, medical expenses. Instead, Calvin had been using it to make payments on his boat and motorcycle. 5 years of theft totaling over $38,000. But it was worse than simple theft. The documents showed Calvin had been reporting my living situation fraudulently, claiming I was his dependent while actively planning to remove me from the household. He'd been collecting money for my care while simultaneously working to get rid of me. How long has he been planning this? I asked, showing her the dates on the paperwork. Mom couldn't answer. She sank into a chair, finally understanding the scope of Calvin's manipulation. I called the Social Security fraud hotline right there in the kitchen. Mom begged me to hang up, promising to fix everything, but it was too late. I'd already started speaking to an investigator. I have evidence of fraudulent collection of survivor benefits, I told the agent. My stepfather has been claiming money meant for my care while actively planning to remove me from the household. The agent asked me to hold while she accessed the account. When she came back, her voice was grim. Sir, I'm seeing some irregularities here. This account shows benefit collection for a dependent who was reported as living outside the home for tax purposes. Can you come to our field office tomorrow with documentation? I spent that night in my motel room going through every piece of paperwork I'd photographed. The pattern was clear. Calvin had been living two financial lives. To the government, I was his dependent deserving of survivor benefits. To the IRS, I was an independent adult so he could claim different tax advantages. He'd been gaming the system in multiple directions, using my father's death and my dependency status to maximize his financial benefit while planning my eventual removal. The next day, I met with federal investigators. They were particularly interested in the timeline showing Calvin's benefit claims continuing, even as he documented plans to emancipate me from the household. This suggests premeditation, the lead investigator explained. He wasn't just collecting benefits inappropriately, he was systematically defrauding multiple government programs while planning to abandon his claimed dependent. 3 days later, federal agents showed up at Calvin's workplace. The investigation revealed he'd been claiming benefits for 2 stepchildren from his first marriage as well, kids who'd been living with their biological father for 3 years. The fraud totaled over $80,000 across 7 years. Calvin was arrested at his office in front of his coworkers. The whole thing made the local news. Local man arrested for Social Security fraud. The article mentioned he'd been stealing from multiple families, including his current stepson, whom he'd recently emancipated. The reporter had done her homework. The story detailed Calvin's pattern of targeting single mothers with teenage children, particularly widows with survivor benefits. It was a devastating portrait of systematic exploitation. Mom called me crying after the arrest. "You've destroyed our family," she sobbed. "He's lost his job. We might lose the house." "You destroyed our family the day you chose him over me," I replied. "I never chose him over you," she protested. "Then why am I living in a motel while he's wearing Dad's watch?" Silence stretched between us before she finally whispered, "I thought if I could just keep him happy we'd be safe, financially secure." Safe from what? From being alone, from struggling like we did after your father died. The government froze their assets pending investigation. Within 2 weeks, Mom and Calvin had to sell the house to pay legal fees. Calvin's lawyer was demanding $50,000 up front, and their savings had been seized as potential proceeds from fraud. Mom moved in with her sister 2 states away. Calvin faced federal charges and up to 10 years in prison. Meanwhile, I used the back benefits I was owed, nearly $15,000, to get my own apartment and start college full-time. Tony helped me transfer to a restaurant near campus where I could work flexible hours around my class schedule. The apartment was a studio above a bakery. It cost $425 a month and came furnished with a bed that folded into the wall and a kitchenette smaller than most people's closets. But it had a window that got morning light, and for the first time in months, I could sleep without the sound of truckers arguing in the parking lot. More importantly, it was mine. No one could take it away because they decided I was inconvenient. I enrolled in community college with a major in social work. My advisor, Dr. Hernandez, noticed my unusual living situation when I listed motel as my permanent address on the initial paperwork. Transitional housing? She asked gently. Family situation, I replied. She studied my face with the expression of someone who'd seen this story before. I run a support group for students experiencing housing insecurity. Meets Thursdays at 6. Free pizza. I showed up that Thursday, expecting maybe 3 other people. Instead, I found 12 students sitting in a circle, sharing stories that made my situation seem almost ordinary. There was Maya, whose parents discovered her girlfriend and gave her an hour to pack. Trevor, whose mom's boyfriend decided 4 kids was too many and convinced her to prioritize the younger ones. Destiny, whose grandmother died and left the house to relatives who changed the locks the day after the funeral. The thing about family rejection, Dr. Hernandez explained, is that it forces you to rebuild your identity from scratch. Some people see that as devastating. I prefer to see it as liberating. For the first time since being kicked out, I didn't feel alone. The group became my lifeline. We studied together, shared resources, celebrated each other's victories. When Maya got her first apartment, we all helped her move. When Trevor's mom reached out wanting to reconcile, we helped him set boundaries. During Calvin's trial 6 months later, more details emerged about his systematic targeting of vulnerable families. The prosecutor called it predatory financial manipulation and presented evidence of a pattern going back over a decade. Calvin's first wife testified that he'd done the same thing to her oldest son, kicked him out at 18 while continuing to collect his disability benefits for another year. His second wife revealed he'd convinced her to sign over her children's college funds to his investment portfolio, then lost it all gambling. The pattern was clear. Calvin was a predator who specifically sought out grieving women with assets he could exploit. When it was time for victim impact statements, I was invited to speak. I'd written a letter, but standing at that podium, looking at Calvin in his orange jumpsuit, I spoke from the heart instead. "You didn't just steal money," I said. "You stole my mother's judgment. You convinced a grieving woman that protecting you was more important than protecting her own child. You made her choose between honoring her dead husband's memory and keeping her new husband happy. And when she chose you, you made sure I paid the price." Calvin stared at the table. He never once looked at me. "But here's what you didn't count on," I continued. "Getting kicked out was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to learn something you never could. That real family doesn't abandon you when things get hard. Real family chooses you every day." I looked at the gallery where my support group friends sat alongside Tony and Dr. Hernandez. These people became my family, not because we share blood, but because we choose each other, because we show up for each other, because we understand that love is a verb, not just a feeling. The judge sentenced Calvin to 4 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution. Mom would have to pay back the money too, as a co-conspirator, though her sentence was suspended due to her cooperation with investigators. After the sentencing, Mom approached me in the courthouse hallway. "I know you hate me," she said. "I don't hate you," I replied. "I just don't trust you anymore." She looked older, smaller. The confident woman who'd married Calvin had been replaced by someone who seemed to be shrinking into herself. "I want to make this right," she said. "You can't. Some things once broken don't go back together the same way." But she kept trying. First came the letters. Long, rambling apologies explaining how grief had made her vulnerable, how Calvin had isolated her from friends and family, how she'd lost herself in trying to create a new normal after Dad's death. The letters detailed things I hadn't known, how Calvin had convinced her to cut contact with Dad's family because they reminded her of painful memories, how he'd discouraged her friendships because other people didn't understand their relationship, how he'd gradually taken control of all financial decisions because he was better with money. I read them all but didn't respond. I wasn't ready to process her explanations, even if they were genuine. Then came the packages, small things, photos she'd saved of Dad and me, his old coffee mug, the recipe book his mother had given her, items she'd hidden from Calvin during their marriage, afraid he'd throw them away. Each package came with a note explaining where she'd hidden the item and why she'd saved it. The photos had been in a safety deposit box Calvin didn't know about. The coffee mug had been wrapped in towels at the bottom of her hope chest. The recipe book had been disguised among her work files. I kept the photos and recipe book. I donated the rest to charity, but I appreciated that she thought to save them. 6 months after Calvin's sentencing, Mom called. "I'm in therapy," she said. "Twice a week. I want you to know I'm trying to understand how I could have done what I did." "That's good for you," I said. The therapist says I was trauma bonded to Calvin, that losing your father made me so afraid of being alone that I attached to the first person who promised security, even when that security came at your expense. Therapy speak doesn't change what happened. No, it doesn't. But it helps me understand how I became someone who could abandon her own child. She paused. The therapist wants to do a family session, if you're willing. I wasn't willing. Not yet. A year passed. I made the dean's list both semesters and landed an internship at a nonprofit that helped homeless youth transition to independent living. The work felt personal. I understood the terror of not knowing where you'd sleep, the shame of explaining your situation to strangers, the relief of finding people who wanted to help instead of judge. My supervisor, Keisha, had been kicked out at 16 for refusing to give her mother's boyfriend the location of her college savings account. Family trauma makes you hypervigilant, she explained during one of our supervision meetings, but it also makes you incredibly empathetic to other people's pain. Use that gift. I started facilitating support groups for teenagers aging out of foster care. Many had been abandoned by family members who were supposed to protect them. I shared my story carefully, focusing on the survival strategies that had worked. The first thing you need to understand, I'd tell new group members, is that their rejection says nothing about your worth. It says everything about their capacity for love. One 17-year-old named Bryson had been kicked out for refusing to lie to police about his stepfather's drug dealing. His mother had chosen protecting her husband over protecting her son. I keep thinking if I'd just done what they wanted, I'd still have a family, he said during one session. You'd still have people who share your address, I corrected, but you wouldn't have a family. Family doesn't ask you to compromise your integrity to earn their love. Working with these kids forced me to process my own experience differently. I wasn't just a victim of family dysfunction. I was a survivor who could help others navigate similar trauma. One evening, after a particularly difficult group session, I found Mom waiting by my car. How did you find me? I asked. Your aunt told me where you work. I've been coming here for weeks, hoping to catch you. She looked healthier than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was styled, her clothes fit properly, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Clarity. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, she said. I know I don't deserve that. I'm here to tell you something I should have said in that courtroom. I waited, keys in my hand, ready to leave if this turned into another manipulation. Calvin didn't manipulate me into choosing him over you. I made that choice myself. I was so terrified of being alone that I convinced myself love meant compromise, even when the compromise meant sacrificing my own child. She took a shaky breath. I thought if I could just keep Calvin happy, we'd be a family again. But we were never a family. Calvin made sure of that. He needed me isolated to maintain control. Getting rid of you wasn't a side effect of his plan. It was the goal. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth, and because I want you to know that every day I live with the knowledge that I failed the most important job I ever had, protecting you. We stood by my car as the sun set behind the office building. The parking lot was mostly empty, and I could hear the sounds of the city settling into evening. Traffic, sirens, life continuing regardless of our small drama. I've been thinking about what you said in court, she continued, about real family choosing you every day. You're right. I stopped choosing you the day I prioritized Calvin's comfort over your safety. She pulled an envelope from her purse. This is for you. Not because I think it fixes anything, but because it's yours. Inside was a cashier's check for $23,000. It's my half of the house sale, minus what I owed in restitution. I know it doesn't cover everything Calvin stole from you, but it's what I have. I stared at the check. $23,000 would pay for my remaining college expenses and give me a real safety net. I can't take this. Yes, you can. Consider it back child support or guilt money. I don't care what you call it, but it's yours. She turned to leave, then stopped. I know I can't be your mother anymore. Not the way I was before, but I need you to know. You became an incredible man despite what I did to you. Your father would be so proud. That night, I called Dr. Hernandez. I think I'm ready for that family therapy session, I said. The session was brutal. 3 hours of crying, yelling, and truth-telling in a small office that smelled like lavender and regret. Mom's therapist, Dr. Chen, didn't let either of us hide behind euphemisms or blame shifting. Linda, tell your son specifically what you did wrong, she instructed. I abandoned you when you needed me most, Mom said, looking directly at me. I chose a man over my child. I let him erase your father's memory. I stood by while he stole from you. I prioritized my fear of loneliness over your safety and well-being. And what was the impact of those choices? I taught him that his worth was conditional, that family love could be withdrawn at any time, that he wasn't important enough to fight for. Hearing her say it out loud was both validating and devastating. I'd spent years wondering if I was being too sensitive, if I should have tried harder to make the situation work. Dr. Chen turned to me. What do you need from your mother now? I need her to stop trying to fix this, I said. I need her to accept that some damage is permanent, and I need her to understand that if we have any relationship going forward, it will be on my terms. What would those terms look like? I thought about it carefully. Complete honesty. No more excuses about grief or manipulation. Own your choices, and understand that forgiveness isn't the same as trust. I might forgive you someday, but I'll never trust you the way I did before. Mom nodded through her tears. I can live with that, she said. We left that session with an agreement. Monthly phone calls, no unannounced visits, and complete transparency about her life and recovery process. It wasn't reconciliation exactly. It was something more realistic. A cautious rebuilding based on clear boundaries and honest communication. 2 years later, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in social work. Mom came to the ceremony sitting in the back, not presuming she belonged with the families celebrating together. After the ceremony, she approached cautiously. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Thank you. Your father would have loved seeing this day." For the first time in years, I believed her. I started graduate school that fall, specializing in family trauma and crisis intervention. My thesis research focused on the long-term impacts of family rejection on young adults. I interviewed dozens of people who'd been kicked out, abandoned, or disowned by their families. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Parents who chose partners over children, families who prioritized image over protection, adults who abandoned responsibility when it became inconvenient. But the resilience was remarkable. Nearly everyone I interviewed had not just survived but thrived. They'd built chosen families, developed unprecedented independence, and cultivated empathy that made them powerful advocates for others. Trauma creates two kinds of people, one interview subject told me. Those who perpetuate the cycle and those who break it. Getting kicked out forced me to choose which kind I wanted to be. My research caught the attention of several major universities. I was offered full scholarships to PhD programs at schools I'd only dreamed of attending. I graduated with my MSW and was hired immediately by the same nonprofit where I'd interned. Within 2 years, I was promoted to program director, overseeing services for homeless and displaced youth across 3 counties. The work was demanding but fulfilling. Every kid I helped represented a choice, to be the support system they deserved instead of the family they'd lost. On my 26th birthday, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my father's wedding ring, wrapped in a note. "Found this in Calvin's things when he moved out. Thought you should have it. Someone who believes in justice." I never found out who sent it, but I suspected one of Calvin's children from his first marriage. They'd testified about his pattern of stealing meaningful items from stepchildren, and this felt like their way of returning what should have been mine. That night, I called Mom. "Someone sent me Dad's wedding ring," I said. She started crying immediately. "I thought Calvin had sold it. I looked everywhere after he was arrested. Do you want it back?" "No," she said firmly. "It belongs with you. You're the one carrying on his legacy." For my 27th birthday, I threw a party. Not a big celebration, just the people who'd become my chosen family over the years. Tony from the restaurant, now retired but still checking in on me. Dr. Hernandez and several classmates from the support group. Keisha and my co-workers from the nonprofit. My girlfriend Rachel, who'd also survived family rejection and understood the particular strength it required. We gathered in my new apartment, a real 2-bedroom place with a kitchen table and space for guests. I'd hung photos of all of them alongside pictures of Dad and me. The walls told the story of who I'd become, not who I'd lost. Mom wasn't invited, but she sent a card. "Happy birthday to the man who taught me that love means choosing someone every day, not just when it's convenient." Inside was a photo I'd never seen, Dad and me when I was maybe 5 building a snow fort in our backyard. On the back, she'd written, "He knew you'd be extraordinary. So do I." That photo sits on my desk now, next to my degrees and awards for youth advocacy work. It reminds me that some love transcends even the deepest betrayals. Calvin was released after serving 3 years. He moved to another state and, according to my attorney who monitored the case, works construction under supervision. He's prohibited from collecting any form of government benefits and has to report any change in living situation. His life imploded completely. His first wife pursued civil damages for the benefits he'd stolen from her kids. His second wife divorced him and moved across the country. None of his biological children speak to him anymore. He tried to contact me once through social media, claiming he wanted to make amends. I blocked him immediately and reported the contact to his probation officer. Some people don't deserve second chances. Mom and I talk monthly now. She's built a life that doesn't revolve around a man's approval. She works as a victim advocate at a domestic violence shelter and sponsors other women in her support group. "I spent so many years afraid of being alone," she told me during one of our calls. "Now I understand that being alone is better than being with someone who requires you to betray yourself." She's dating someone new, a widower she met through grief counseling who has adult children of his own. But she's taking it slowly, applying the lessons she learned about not losing herself in relationships. "I won't make the same mistakes again," she promised me. "I know what it costs." Last month, I got a letter from a teenager named Marcus, whose parents kicked him out for refusing to drop out of school to work full-time in their family business. "I saw your interview in Youth Services Quarterly," he wrote. "You said getting kicked out taught you that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. I'm trying to believe that, but it's hard when your own parents say you're worthless." I wrote back with Tony's words, then added my own. "The people who reject you are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them, then go find the people who choose you on purpose." A week later, Marcus called. His voice was shaky but determined. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "I've been sleeping in my car for 3 weeks, thinking maybe I should just give up and go back home. But after reading your letter, I applied for emergency housing through the county. They're helping me finish school and transition to independence." "How does it feel?" I asked. "Scary, but also free? Like I can finally become who I'm supposed to be instead of who they wanted me to be." That's when I knew my story had come full circle. Marcus was where I'd been 8 years ago. Terrified, abandoned, but discovering that survival was possible. That freedom was worth the fear. "The scary part gets easier," I told him. "The freedom part gets better." Now at 27, I run the largest youth services program in the state. We've helped over 3,000 kids transition from family rejection to independent living. Our success rate is 89%, higher than any comparable program in the country. The secret isn't revolutionary. We treat these kids like they matter. We believe their stories. We don't try to reunite them with families who've proven they can't be trusted. Instead, we help them build new support systems based on mutual respect and genuine care. My office walls are covered with graduation photos, wedding invitations, birth announcements, evidence that throwaways can thrive when given the chance. Rachel and I got engaged last year. She proposed at the annual conference for youth advocates, in front of 500 people who understood that chosen family is just as sacred as biological family. "I want to build something real with you," she said, down on one knee in the hotel ballroom. "The kind of family that chooses love every single day. We're planning a small wedding. Tony will walk me down the aisle. He's earned that honor through 8 years of showing up. Dr. Hernandez will officiate. She got ordained online specifically for our ceremony. My support group friends will be the wedding party. Mom will be invited, but she'll sit with the regular guests. She understands her role now, grateful to be included, not entitled to prominence. Calvin will not be invited. Some boundaries are permanent. Last week I received an email that stopped me cold. The subject line read, 'From Calvin's daughter. My name is Jessica, and Calvin is my biological father. I found your story online and wanted you to know that you weren't his only victim. He did the same thing to my brother and me when we were teenagers. Our mother finally left him when I was 16, but not before he'd stolen our college funds and convinced her to sign over custody of my younger brother to avoid disrupting his new family. I'm now 35 and have spent years in therapy processing what happened. Reading about your experience helped me understand that we weren't alone, and that his behavior was part of a pattern, not a personal failure on our part. I wanted to thank you for speaking out. Your testimony at his trial was the first time I'd heard someone articulate exactly what he does to families. You gave me language for my own experience. I also wanted you to know that the watch and ring I sent you were rightfully yours. I found them in his belongings when he was arrested and couldn't stand the thought of him keeping stolen memories from another child he'd hurt. My brother and I have both built good lives despite what he put us through. I'm a teacher now, and my brother is a social worker. We chose careers that let us protect other people's children since we couldn't protect ourselves. I hope you found peace. You deserved so much better than what our father gave you. Jessica." I sat in my office, reading her words over and over. Calvin's biological children had been victims too. The man who'd claimed I wasn't his responsibility had abandoned his own blood just as easily. I wrote back immediately, "Jessica, thank you for reaching out, and thank you for returning my father's belongings. Knowing they came from someone who understood their significance means everything. I'm sorry you and your brother went through similar trauma. You're right that we weren't alone. Calvin was a predator who targeted entire families, not just stepchildren. I'd love to connect you with some resources for adult survivors of family financial abuse. There's a growing network of people working to expose these patterns and support recovery. You and your brother choosing helping professions shows incredible strength. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. If you're ever in the area, I'd be honored to meet you both. Survivors need to stick together. With admiration and solidarity, my name." A month later, Jessica and her brother David drove 6 hours to visit my program. Meeting them felt like closing a circle I didn't know was open. "He always made us feel like we were the problem," David said as we toured our residential facility. "Like we were too difficult, too expensive, too much trouble." "Classic predator behavior," I replied. "They convince their victims that the abuse is somehow their fault." Jessica nodded. "Our mother spent years apologizing for not making the marriage work, as if his systematic financial abuse was a relationship problem instead of criminal behavior. We talked for hours, comparing notes about Calvin's manipulation tactics. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Isolate the mother, turn her against her own children, steal whatever assets were available, then abandon the family when it was no longer profitable. "How many families do you think he destroyed?" David asked. "Probably more than we'll ever know," I said. "Men like Calvin don't usually limit themselves to 3 families. Before they left, Jessica handed me a business card. She'd started a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for single mothers, specifically teaching them to recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. "Your story inspired me to go public with mine," she said. "I've been speaking at women's shelters about how predators target grieving families. We should collaborate," I suggested. "Your work with mothers, mine with displaced kids. We could create a comprehensive prevention program." That collaboration became the foundation for what's now called the Family Justice Initiative. We've trained thousands of social workers, law enforcement officers, and victim advocates to recognize patterns of systematic family abuse. Our protocols have been adopted by Child Protective Services agencies in 12 states. We've prevented an estimated 847 family dissolutions through early intervention and education. The work feels like honoring every family Calvin destroyed, including my own. Mom and I met for coffee last month on the 8-year anniversary of being kicked out. It's become our annual tradition. Not celebrating exactly, but acknowledging how far we've both traveled. "I have something to tell you," she said, stirring her latte nervously. My stomach clenched. "What?" "I'm writing a book. About what happened. About how I let grief make me vulnerable to someone who exploited our family." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. "Why?" "Because there are other women out there making the same mistakes I made. Choosing security over their children. believing that any family is better than no family. She pulled out a manuscript, maybe 200 pages thick. I want to call it Choosing Wrong, How I Lost My Son to Save Myself, but I won't publish it without your permission. I flipped through the pages, reading chapter titles: The Widow's Bargain, When Love Becomes Betrayal, The Cost of Convenient Truth. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to read it. Tell me if I got it right. Tell me if it honors your experience or exploits it. I took the manuscript home that night and read it in one sitting. It was brutal, unflinchingly honest about her choices, her motivations, her rationalizations. She didn't portray herself as a victim of Calvin's manipulation. She owned her decisions completely. The most powerful chapter was called The Day I Stopped Being His Mother. It detailed the moment she watched Calvin put my belongings in garbage bags and realized she was choosing to let it happen. I could have stopped him, she wrote. I could have said, no, this is my son, and this is his home. But I was too afraid of losing Calvin to risk protecting my child. In that moment, I stopped being a mother and became an accomplice. I called her the next morning. Publish it, I said. Really? Really? But I want to write the foreword. The book came out a year later. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It reached the audience that mattered, women in vulnerable situations who needed to see the warning signs. The foreword I wrote began, "This is the story of how I lost my family and found myself. It's also the story of how my mother lost herself and eventually found her way back to the truth. Some stories don't have happy endings. This one has an honest ending, which is better. 3 years after being thrown out with garbage bags, I understood something I couldn't see then. Getting kicked out wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of learning I could survive on my own, the beginning of choosing people who chose me back, the beginning of building a life based on my values instead of other people's expectations, the beginning of becoming the person I was meant to be, not the person others wanted me to be. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes losing everything is how you find yourself. And sometimes, the family that kicks you out does you the biggest favor of your life. They force you to discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined, and that the people worth having in your life are the ones who want you there. Mom and I will never have the relationship we had before Calvin. That mother and son died the day she chose him over me, but we've built something new, more honest, more realistic, and strangely more durable. Because now when she chooses to be in my life, I know it's actually a choice, not obligation, not guilt, not fear of loneliness. Choice. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough. 10 years later, I'm 37 and the director of a national organization dedicated to supporting youth aging out of family systems. We operate in 47 states and have a waiting list of communities wanting our programs. Rachel and I have been married for 5 years. We bought a house with a big backyard where we host monthly dinners for anyone who needs a place to belong. Our table has seated everyone from former program participants to elderly neighbors who've outlived their families. We're in the process of adopting 2 siblings, Maya, 16, and her brother Luis, 14, whose parents died in a car accident. Their extended family fought over the life insurance money, but nobody wanted the responsibility of raising 2 grieving teenagers. We don't want to replace your parents, I told them during our first meeting. We want to be the family that helps you honor their memory while building your own future. Maya looked at me with eyes that held too much pain for 16 years. What if we're too broken? Then you'll fit right in, Rachel said gently. We're all a little broken here. That's what makes us careful with each other. The adoption will be finalized next month. Maya wants to keep her parents' last name, and we support that completely. Luis is interested in taking ours. Both choices are valid. That's the lesson I learned from my own journey. Family isn't about names or blood or obligation. It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when things get difficult. It's about creating safety for each other to become who we're meant to be. Calvin died in prison last year, heart attack during his sleep. Mom called to tell me, unsure if I'd want to know. How do you feel about it? She asked. Relieved, I said honestly. Now he can't hurt anyone else. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry it took me so long to see who he really was. I'm sorry it cost us so much for you to learn. Neither of us cried. Some endings don't deserve tears. Last week, I gave a keynote speech at the National Conference on Youth Homelessness. 500 social workers, advocates, and survivors filled the auditorium. The traditional approach to family preservation assumes that maintaining family connections is always the goal, I told them. But some families are toxic. Some families cause more harm than separation ever could. I looked out at the audience, many of whom I knew had their own stories of family rejection. Our job isn't to reunite kids with families who've proven they can't be trusted. Our job is to help them build new families based on mutual respect and genuine care. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She looked maybe 25, professionally dressed, confident. You probably don't remember me, she said, but my name is Destiny. You ran a support group I attended 8 years ago when I was aging out of foster care. I did remember her, the girl whose grandmother had died and left her homeless at 17. I wanted you to know that your group saved my life, she continued. I was planning to suicide before I found that Thursday night meeting. You taught me that family rejection wasn't a verdict on my worth. It was information about their capacity for love. She handed me a business card, Dr. Destiny Williams, licensed clinical social worker. I work with aging out youth now. I tell them the same things you told me. Stop trying to make it work with people who don't want you. Start building something with people who do. As she walked away, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had in years. He would have been proud, not just of what I'd accomplished, but of how I'd chosen to use my pain to help others heal. That night, I called Mom. "I forgive you," I told her. She started crying immediately. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because I want to. Because forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to be free." We talked for 2 hours that night. About Dad, about the choices that had brought us to this point, about the family we were slowly rebuilding. "I know I can't undo what happened," she said before we hung up. "No, you can't, but you can keep choosing to do better. That's all any of us can do." Now, when people ask me about getting kicked out, I tell them the truth. It was the worst thing that happened to me, and it was the best thing that happened to me. It taught me that I was stronger than I knew. It forced me to discover what I actually valued instead of what I thought I should value. It showed me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you choose to give and receive. Most importantly, it taught me that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. The family that threw me away thinking I was worthless accidentally set me free to discover my actual worth. The mother who chose a predator over her son eventually learned what real choice looks like. The system that failed to protect me became the system I dedicated my life to changing. Every kid I help represents a choice to break the cycle. Every family we preserve represents a victory over people like Calvin. Every program we create represents hope that someday, no child will have to choose between family loyalty and personal safety. 10 years later, I understand that getting kicked out wasn't about punishment. It was about liberation. And sometimes, the greatest gift dysfunctional families can give their children is the freedom to find functional ones.